how good are Mesmer's core traits in Guild Wars 2? This is what we want to answer in this video today. This might be a very long video, but I will talk about every single core trait that Guild Wars 2's Mesmer has access to, and I want to give you my take when this trait is good, how it works, how it functions in a specific scenario. This video is more focused towards new players that want to deeply understand a specific class, or veterans that want to debate how good specific traits and how they should rework some traits and stuff are. This is more important to me. This is a video not for everyone, but if you enjoy deep theory crafting and talking about some really overanalyzed stuff and nerdy debates, this is for you. Be sure to watch the whole video if you don't want to miss out on anything of that. As always, special shout out to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch and Patreon that help me keep the lights on. And now without much further ado, let's jump straight in. Mesmer has 5 core range lines like every other class at this point, and I want to start with the offensive ones. So let's start with Domination. Domination is clearly very offensive, used in all game modes if you play a power build. It's really power build focused, wound removal and power, NCCing. That's really the whole thing. So you get passively inflict vulnerability when you interrupt a foe. That's quite nice. This 3 seconds ICD is only working on bosses. So everything else is instant, like you have no ICD. So if you CC 3 times within 1 second, you will get 18 vulnerability on a target if it's not a boss with a Defiance bar. So keep that in mind. Really, really nice to burst someone down on a power build, especially because dazing or stunning also implies vulnerability. So you're actually interrupting and dazing and stunning the attack. So if you interrupt someone, you actually get 11 stacks already. Then D more damage, strike damage, power damage against vulnerability on the foe. So vulnerability baseline gives you 1% more damage against the target. This one increases the power damage by 0.5% on top of that, so that's quite nice. The whole trait line is focused around bursting someone with vulnerability and then dealing a lot of power damage. Your traits are also similar. So Bountiful Blades is a trait that you want to take on a power greatsword build. It gives improved greatsword skills. So Mirror Blade bounces 2 additional times, that it's the 2 skill on greatsword, really, really strong because of that. And the 4th skill summons now 2 berserkers instead of 1, but the damage of both of them are reduced by 33%. So in total you get more damage doing that, and you create 2 phantasms, which procs 2 times traits that are dealing damage that are phantasms. So for example, Virtuoso gets more procs from that, or Chronomancer gets more procs from quickness and electric on that, so that's a really nice trait in all game modes because of that. Then you get illusions to increase strike damage. Yeah, very nice trait in general. You take that very often because illusions are a nice damage source, and if you don't play greatsword, that's the best damage option that you can get here. Also only power damage. Then Shatter skills inflict vulnerability on hit. That's a trait that you would take, for example, in competitive modes if you want to burst someone with vulnerability, or really strong on Virtuoso in World vs. World or PvP, for example, because all your blades actually inflict that, so you actually get 5 times this proc, and if you spam that, you actually get a lot of vulnerability on the target. So all 3 traits have their usage. The same goes, of course, for the middle traits here. Shattered Concentration, really strong boon removal that is really strong in competitive modes. In PvE, you don't need that much boon removal, so there's not that good. And this is really strong how much boons remove on Virtuoso, because all the blades do that. The same goes for all the illusions, of course, as well. Then you have Egotism. That's really interesting because that just increases your damage 10% in PvE most of the time, because it depends how much health percentage the enemy has. And typically you should be at full life in PvE, and therefore you get 10% more power damage. That's why you take that in power builds. And then you have Furious Interruption, which is the only trait here I would say that is not that useful. Gain quickness when interrupting a foe and a 1 second ICD, and you get some might. But it is not very useful in PvE because you typically have might and quickness anyway, and in competitive modes the other 2 traits are just way better. So typically you would take in competitive modes the boon removal, but this one can be played. It's not bad, but it's not that good either. So I would say this is the first trait here that I would say is not that good. And then you have Vicious Expression, really strong trait in PvE, 15% damage increase because you fight almost always foes with no boons, and disabling a foe removes 2 boons from them. That works again against Defiant targets as well, so you just have to CC them and you remove 2 boons. That doesn't have an ICD, it's extremely strong how easily you can do that. So Power Virtuoso, Power Chronomancer, even Power Mirage, they have amazing boon removal if they take this trait. Then you have Mental Anguish, Setter skills do more damage. Yeah, it sounds amazing, but typically it's not the only thing that you'll do damage with, and having a 15% damage increase baseline or 25% damage increase or even 50% damage increase on the Shatter skills is not good enough. That's why this trait is in no content run because it's not really that important, but you can run it in World vs. World if you're only shattering, only using the F1, for example, for big damage. Then it could be useful, but I think this one is power block is a little bit better in a lot of situations, because when you CC a target, you get a damage buff for 25% for the next few seconds, and that's really good, and it also leaves some damage and weakness on the interrupt. So I would say this trade is more competitive focused, where this trade is more PvE focused, and this trade is not that good in most situations. Then we have Dueling. Dueling is a trade line that is focused on supporting dodging while also empowering your crits. So you get Vigor when you critical hit, quite nice, good stuff, typically for competitive modes more useful than in PvE. Then your illusions inflict bleeding on crits. That's not that good on a power build, but on a condi build it's actually quite potent, so quite nice as well to have. It's after all the crit trade line. And then when you critically strike an enemy every 8 seconds, you get Fury for yourself, and you get some half amount of Fury for allies as well. That's quite nice to just help your supports upkeep Fury in PvE, and can of course help a lot in competitive modes as well to get some nice more damage increase. Then your Phantasms have Fury. Typically your Phantasms don't have wounds, so giving them Fury gives them more crit chance and therefore they hit harder. So that's quite nice, that's why we would take it in PvE. In competitive modes that's not that useful. You can run it of course for more damage, but typically the other two traits are here more useful. Here you have the pistol attack. Pistol attacks from you and the illusions have a chance to cause bleeding. That's good on a condi build, but the second line is important even for a power pistol build. Interrupting a foe recharges pistol skills, and it's actually quite a lot of recharge, so 25 on interrupt %. So that's really good. So if you interrupt a few times, you actually have the pistol skills back up. It's really, really strong in that regard, but typically you don't run pistol that often anymore in all game modes. So it can be used, but it's not that important. Typically, you would rather run in competitive modes when you successfully evade an attack, gain Vigor. Just more Vigor uptime helps you to dodge more often, evade the dangerous attacks, while also on Mirage, for example, get a damage multiplier. So that's why you would typically take that in competitive modes, whereas this one is very useful in PvE. Then you have Blinding Dissipation. Setter skill 2 inflicts blindness. That sounds like a really bad trade. Just one blind on your F2, but again, on Virtuoso, that can be really nice because it applies blind on multiple hits. That's good. And it is also instant cast on all the other elite specs. So you can actually negate attacks instantly by blinding them. In competitive modes, that's really good. In PvE, not that important. But blind is really good on Mesmer. You will see why in a second. Then you have Wandering Mind. This is a rather new trait. Remove a non-damaging condition and gain swiftness whenever you evade an attack. 1 second ICD. I think in competitive modes it's higher, but it's still a decent trait because it removes a non-damaging condition. So not burning, but it might remove cripple and stuff, and you get swiftness. So it's not bad, but I would say it's the defensive option that can be played in some competitive setup. In PvE, I would typically not play that. But you also have the damage increase option here on Fencer's Finesse, gain a stacking ferocity effect, while you or your illusion strike with a one-handed sword or an underwater spear, not the on-land spear, and you get reduced sword and underwater spear skills cooldown. That's quite nice. The ferocity is actually quite potent, so if you play sword main hand, for example, you can get to 150 ferocity. That's actually quite good. Sword offhand typically is harder to reach, but still worthwhile, and it's definitely worth for the reduced reach shot. So I would say if you play any swords, it's worthwhile using, because the other two traits are very situational. And then you have Superiority Complex, of course, crazy damage multiplier on your crit chance, critical hits, really, really good. And it's just really, really potent in all game modes, but in PvE, typically the only trait that is run. In competitive modes, you would typically often take Deceptive Evasion because you create a clone or you are played when you are dodging in combat, and that's really, really good because then your shatter skills can be played with more clones and get more potent because of that. So really nice clone generation because of that. But you could also take, and that's the important part that interacts with Blinding Dissipation here, interrupting a foe inflicts blind, and blinding a foe inflicts confusion. So that means that you can get some really nasty combos. When you interrupt someone, you inflict blind, this inflicts confusion, and then if you spike them with, for example, F2 as well, you get a big confusion spike because of all the blinds and all the interrupts. And that means that they, if you're playing condi build, can kill themselves by just using a few attacks. This is a very crazy good condi confusion spike trait that you would only use in competitive modes. This is in PvE sadly not that good because it's not like you could play a condi build and that uses that, but typically you would, I'm not sure if you would run this straight line then, but it's a very good competitive mode trait. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. I will cover all the classes if you like this video here. And of course, I will also make a video about the elite spec traits, because today we only take about the core traits. But now let's talk about the next core trait line. The next core trait line that we are talking about is Chaos. Chaos is like the complete opposite of the two trait lines that we talked about, whereas this is now completely defensive and condi focused. And the defensiveness comes, of course, from grant regeneration to allies when you use a heal skill, so you get some nice boons around you. You get Chaos Aura when you use your F2 skill, and Chaos Aura grants you condition damage for a short time. That's quite nice. It also stacks, so that can go up to 15 seconds. 7% more condition damage in PvE is not bad, especially on a condi build. It can help a lot, so Chaos is a really good trait line already for that. And then gain concentration and expertise while affected by regeneration. In PvE, you have that all the time. Really nice stat stick. And in competitive modes, that's also not that bad. You get less, but still quite worthwhile. Then for the traits that you get here, the first one is a passive one, cast lesser Chaos Storm when using a healing skill. That is only running in PvE because it can be used to get a nice combo field and get some damage out, but it's not that crazy in competitive modes. It can be annoying, but it's not that good. Then you have Illusional Defense, very important trait for all game modes. If you play a support Chronomancer, grant protection to nearby allies when you use a shatter skill too. The base protection is not that high, but for each clone that you shatter as well, it goes on top of that, and then you can get up to really high numbers and can upkeep it permanently on your allies if you have enough boon duration or reset your shatter skills that often. So it's really, really important to just get some protection out. Alone, as it can be quite good as well. Keep that in mind, but of course it's more a supportive trait. And then Manipulation, grant H's to yourself and nearby allies. This is like one of the worst traits to have in the game. It gives H's on using a manipulation skill. Okay, not bad, but sadly there are no manipulations that are like crazy good and just in general useful for a lot of situations, because manipulations are Blink, Arcane Theory, Illusion of Life, and Mimic. So there is nothing in there that is like insane, like for competitive modes. Maybe Arcane Theory, but then you would, if you're playing like it's really weird. It's like a helping trait for allies. And you get some H's as well, but taking a trait over that one that gives protection, it seems weird. It's not that strong. Sadly, I think this one needs a bit of a rework. I don't see why this trait is like so weak. It could also give you protection on top of that, and then you might take it if you run a lot of manipulations. But with this, you drop protection uptime to get some H's out of it, maybe with Defender Relic, but I don't know. I think this is really weak. Then you get Auspicious Anguish, convert damaging conditions to boons whenever you gain distortion or become disabled. This is really interesting because this only procs every 35 seconds, and it only takes damaging conditions from you and converts them into boons. Quite nice, but has 35-second cooldown from the disable, and distortion can be used all the time. So if you run it with a specific trait later in Inspiration, you actually get a lot of damage conversion using this trait. But typically this trait is a little bit like power grab nowadays, because you really want to take this one. Gaining Chaos Aura grants boons to nearby allies. That is really strong because you can upkeep just a lot of regen by using this. Yeah, you get a lot of Chaos Aura, get a lot of regen out of that, helps upkeeping this. So you would, if you're playing a support build, you would run that, and if you're playing a Condi DPS build, you would run this. Gain condition damage, gain additional condition damage while wielding a staff, and you get recharge reduction. It's just really strong on a Condi build. On a support build, you would run that. And this one is like, sometimes you could run it in competitive modes, but I would never run it in PvE. And I think it's a really cool, interesting idea, but it's a little bit niche. So I think all of the traits can be used. And then lastly, sadly, the last three traits here are a little bit like you have to take one. This one, Bountiful Disillusionment, in all game modes is insane. Gain stability when you use a shatter skill. In PvE, it's way longer than it's in competitive modes, but getting stability on an instant cast activation skill is really strong. And grant additional boons to nearby allies and you when you shatter. So you can get resistance, stability, fury, vigor, might. That is really, really strong. Just share it out. It's very nice. That's the most important thing about Boon Chronomancer, for example. But they will remove the stability here and put it on the F5 instead of the F4, so it gets a little bit harder to access in the future, but we will get regeneration on the 4. Might be still okay, but is a little bit worse than for sure. So this trait is really, really strong, really crazy on all builds that use Chaos, extremely strong. You would typically not run Prismatic Understanding anymore. That was a trait from the past. Increase stealth duration for Mesmer skills, gain random boons while you're on stealth. The boons are almost completely worthless. The stealth duration increase can be good in some kind of skip scenarios in PvE, or if you really want to annoy your opponents in World vs. World, but dropping this trait for that one feels really bad, so typically you would not run that. And then you have Chaotic Interruption. This trait got like reworked 5 times, and now it's when you interrupt a foe, recharge one of your equipped weapon skills at random. Every 1 second has that, and it only affects weapon skills that are recharging, so that's good for you. But it's only 5 seconds. So when you interrupt a foe, you get a 5-second recharge on a weapon skill. Because of the randomness here, it can be really good or it can be really bad. Because if it's like a skill that is like short cooldown, that you don't want to use or don't want to reset all the time, and it resets it, feels bad. If it's like a big, nice CC skill that has 30 seconds cooldown and you get it here, it's really nice. So it can be really lucky if you do it correctly, but I think no game mode really makes use out of that because Bountiful Disillusionment is just so good. Why would you drop this trait for some kind of RNG? That's the sad part here. So Chaos is really interesting. I think Chaos is one of the most oppressive trait lines if you play it on some specific builds. And let's now talk about Inspiration, which is a clear healing trait line. This is what you run if you want to be a support. You will never run that in some kind of single scenario or maybe in competitive modes in PvP if you want to be really annoying as a tank, but that's about it. You passively get a Condi Cleanse when you use a healing skill, which is also from your allies. Okay, quite good. Then you grant H's to 5 targets in a 300 radius when you give yourself Distortion or use Shatter skill 4. That's quite nice because this is like just some passive H's that you can put out if you want to negate an attack in PvE, for example, or even in competitive modes. It's just a nice thing to have as a support. And then increase healing to others. Okay, quite nice. Summoning an illusion heals allies around you. So it's not crazy amounts of healing, but you summon a lot of illusions on Mesmer typically, and you just get a nice healing output because of that. It's not the biggest radius, but still quite potent. Then you get, with the feedback, Medic's feedback, cast feedback while reviving an ally, so you reflect projectiles, and feedback revives allies inside its dome. That's quite nice because that will also affect the normal feedback. So if you run feedback and have this trait equipped, you actually get the revive here as well. So can be useful in a lot of PvE or World vs. World situation where a lot of allies are going down. In most situations though, it's better to have an instant revive than having a pulsing revive. Then restorative mantras means that every time you cast or use a charge of a mantra, you get healing to you and your allies. That's quite potent. It's really important on some kind of healing Mesmer builds, so typically you run this one because mantras are really strong. And then Sympathetic Visage, phantasms take conditions from you when you summoned. This is like a trait that you would never run typically because you already have the cleanse here, and if you run the mantra, you get just more healing and you can use the mantra heal to get proc this trait. Why would you then also drop some healing for another Condi Cleanse if you really wanted to, I guess? But it's sadly not as good anymore. Maybe in some kind of tank situations in PvP, but even there I think nowadays this is just better if you run mantras. And then you get Warden's feedback, focus skills, reflect, and have shorter cooldown. That's quite nice. It's very situational in PvE typically on World vs. World. Whenever you run focus, this might come in handy, but you have to drop this one, create a clone when you use a healing skill, which is really good with the mantra again. You see the synergy here. Those 3 traits are insane with the mantra. So you would really want to take this in any modes where you want to play as some kind of heal support Mesmer, and typically dropping for that is a little bit sad. And then you have Temporal Enchanter, really strong trait in World vs. World. When you cast a Glamour skill, allies near the Glamour gain resistance and super speed. Really, really potent. You have really good Glamour skills for AoE situations like feedback, like Null Field, even like Veil. So getting this for super speed and resistance uptime can be quite clutch. But it's very niche. This one is very easy to play in PvE, of course, as well. Then you have Mental Defense. That's like probably the worst in those 3 traits because it's only useful in World vs. World typically. Shatter skill 4 grants boons and breaks allies out of stun. Again, resistance uptime for your allies in World vs. World. And it's a stun break for allies. That can be really clutch if you stun break someone that doesn't have a stun break and they are CC'd and you can save them because of that. But the other 2 traits are just way better in most situations. So having a heal and condition remove on your shatters, instant cast, and the heal scales with the amount of clones that you shatter is just amazing. That's the best trait for all game modes in most situations. Like 90% of the cases, this one is the best trait. Just really, really potent. And then you have another trait that is really, really important, but it's very niche. You have to use signets to make this trait useful at all. But signet have better effects. That's good, but that's not why you take this. You take this because it grants you distortion in competitive modes. So you get, for example, the Aegis for your allies, and you get immune to any damaging conditions. So that can be really clutch if you play some kind of tank build. But in PvE, that's why you mostly take it, is because of the signet of Inspiration. That's the only signet that the improvement is like really crazy good. Because this one increases the number of ally targets. And if you take this trait, that means that this signet now extends the boon duration of 5 targets. So that means that you can stack boons, then extend the duration with this. And if you use Mimic, if you use Continuum Split, you can cast it multiple times and get a lot of boon extension on just an initial boon that only lasts maybe 1 second. You get a lot of increases and you get some crazy amount of like crazy boon stacking going with this. So that can be really worthwhile, but it's really niche. You only run it in some kind of fractal scenarios if you have trouble upkeeping boons in instant content. Typically this trait is way better because it heals and cleanses conditions. Now let's go to the last core trait line, which is Illusions. Illusions is a trait line that is some mix of all. It's a little bit defensive, a little bit offensive. What kind of traits would you run in there? Let's talk about it. So the first one is Shatter Skill 2 inflicts more confusion and has more duration. Okay, on a Condi build quite nice. Then you get passively some damage increase, power and condition damage when you create an illusion. That's good for like all power or Condi builds. For a support build, typically not that important. And then Shatter Skills gain recharge reduction. It's amazing for all content, for all builds. It's really strong. And don't forget that also applies to your Continuum Split. So if you have this trait line, you get the Continuum Split way more often. So that's already quite nice because the cooldown is so long. So let's talk about the traits now that are selectable. So Shatter Storm, Shatter Skill 1 becomes an ammunition skill. That is really potent in competitive modes if you want to burst multiple times. Even in PvE, it can be really clutch. It's just a really nice situational skill that works in most situations actually. Then Persistence of Memory. This one is an interesting one. I use it a lot in solo builds because whenever you Phantasm becomes a clone, it transfers its boons to you. And that means all boons are transferred to you and you can stack up some crazy boons because of that. So that's a really cool trait. It is not useful in most situations, but in solo builds, it's really useful. And then you have the Pledge, which is only a really trait that you would take in competitive modes on a Condi build or in PvE on a Condi build. It's really Condi only. And not in a solo scenario. Flame Bursts from Torch skills inflict additional burning. So it's just empowering your Torch skills by quite a bit. Just a little bit more damage. And then you get Escape Artist when a Phantasm is created, grants distortion. This is typically only run in World vs. World, where your Phantasms want to take one attack, but there is so much damage around that they will just die. Giving them distortion means that they get off their attack. So that's why you would take this. In all other game modes, not really an issue. Then you have Phantasmal Haste. In combination with Persistence of Memory, you get crazy good quickness uptime, and you also get some nice passive quickness when you spawn a Phantasm, so quite nice if you're in a solo scenario or in competitive modes. You would not take this in a group scenario. And then Maimed the Disillusioned. Shatter Skills inflict Torment. This is the trait that you would take on a Condi build. Really just nice damage increase. Whenever a clone or a blade from your Shatter hits the enemy, it inflicts Torment, so you can actually stack Torment quite easily. Then you have Phantasmal Force, that's the power trait, and it's also really strong just for passive might stacking. So in a solo build, again, this would be the typical setup, just getting a lot of might up because of that, and you get more power damage as well. So in general, really good trait for solo scenarios. And in competitive modes can be used as well to get some might ramping going, but typically, you really want to take Master of Fragmentation in competitive modes because your Shatter skills are improved with this. That means your base duration of Continuum Shift is longer, your Distortion reflects projectiles, your F3 strikes up to 5 targets, your F2 cripples as well, so that can be a cover condition, and the F1 just has more crit chance, is obviously really good on a power-based attack, so generally really strong trait, and you typically want to take that in competitive modes all the time. And then you have a weird trait, Malicious Sorcery. Confusion inflict has increased duration. That's quite nice, yeah. And when you dodge an attack, inflict confusion on an attacker, which has an ICD of 1 second. It's not that good, but it's not that bad either. You would take that on a confusion spiking Mesmer build. So this trait can be used in all modes if you play a Condi build, and I would say because of that, it's okay. But I think in competitive modes, you really want to go for this one. So this covers all the traits. Let me know your takes in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for making it through this whole long theory and dry debate. Thanks again to all my supporters, and I hope to see you all in the next video.